bright and early. Gotta go charge. 6:30, got up a little late because it is Sunday. There's really essentially no business, no work early in the morning. People don't wake up as early as they used to. And talk about a point, I would say infraction or refraction would be the case. There's a point where in a life, typically, a person no longer lives with sort of soil your oats, acting out the youth, the hubris of your youth, growing into yourself, growing into your skin, getting it out of your system. And there's a point where that no longer holds true. And we're not talking about the assumed like midlife crisis, or because that's happening on a physical scale, right? That's something that happens on a physical scale with a physical person, right? And so we're talking about a non-physicality, right? The non-physical person, not the persona, but the person, not the straw man. I mean, yeah, you can get into Freudian concepts if you like, the id, the ego, the superego. But there's much more going on than that. There's much more going on than even Carl Jung supported with the anima and the animus, and I know that he alluded at more as well. And left the book open and didn't try to clearly define anything really, but just sort of had this nomenclature to identify certain anomalies and traits. But what's happening is there is an entire floor, if you will, that's unlocked during certain eras or times and events, and suddenly the physics seem to change all around us. And we would like to contend that we stay the same, that there is still a self, but we know at first suspect that this couldn't be true, that this isn't true, that I have changed, that I have been modified, and we don't want to admit that something that happens outside of us could invariably, substantially, and over time, through our assessment, completely alter who we are as a so-called individual. Let's get that charger on. Okay, I suppose that the real answer here is that there is no individual. There is no God. Okay, there is no Jesus. And the growing up aspect is realizing that, well, there is no God and there is no Jesus. And I never would have postulated this in the beginning if it weren't something that was projected to me in the existential, right? And there is no Antichrist. And there is no Satan. And there is, however, something much freakier on a completely different level. And that is that there is 100% people that are bending the narrative from the other side of the veil, so to speak. Even the Wizard of Oz is a misleading notion. Even conceptually, brandishing the concept that there is a good side and a bad side Everything exists within you and around you, and you are a part of the organism. You live on the same dead corpse that everyone else does. You are reliant on the metabolism that has been assigned to you by the very shape that allows you certain cybernetic informations based on the circuitous angles, compass squares, the geometrical constants that surround you and are a part of you. So, become what you are is an entirely different statement. It really is become what you are allowed to do. Is there a breakaway? Can you break away? Does spirituality exist? More so, people are looking at spirituality as a complete farce, you know? And people like to stare at you, you know, as if you were their entertainment. And that's what I give them. Because you got to understand that society works against you. It's made to do that. In fact, that's how you get paid. You get paid to be antithetical to the individual, because the individual will set off an incendiary mechanism of power and control, and a shift in the axis of power and control. And that's not originally what the human design was made for. That's what the Genesis is all about. In fact, that's what everything is about. It's about a modification that takes place. Was there an accident? Was there an unplanned modification taking place? Nobody ever said that. They just stated in Genesis and other pieces of literature around the world what took place, right? You can look at the Zulu. But we get fascinated by the reptilian aspect. In other words, it's still Star Trek. It's still an existential shift or change in the norm, or the standard of the norm, of what we've been conditioned to see, believe, and do through a merely purely aesthetic point of view. But nothing works on aesthetics. In other words, in this culture or subculture, if you will, breakaway, break-off culture, the aesthetic aspect is only representative in what you are allowed to do. So you only have so many tools available to you. It's kind of like going up to a piano, and the necessary bars, the necessary keys in order to create a song, to go through all the notes, are barred and are not there. And you kind of have to work with what, I'm going to put my shoes on here. You have to work with what you've got, and then you call that compromise an instrument, where it doesn't do what we would assume as the logical design would imply it to do. But you can get by through human effort, as they say, and resilience. You can get by. You can create a song. You can make some cool sounds, and you might even create a new instrument out of that, you know. And so, what is necessary as far as the main components of principal components? What is necessary to create a thing? You start to look at it and you realize, wow, this is pretty complex. Like the human condition, being heavily reliant upon the microorganisms, and it should be noted that Dr. Michael Levin's work isn't microbiology. It leads into microbiology, but it is studies on, I believe, on the bullfrog, right? So, I mean, it leads into a whole different area of work because you're looking at genetic influences, patterns, traits, but more specifically, you're looking at a base of life. Much like the mushroom, the frog emerges and represents something that may be a base carrier. Like, it's not as glamorous to look at Prometheus as a bullfrog or a frog, right? It's not as glamorous as looking at the apple that fell on Newton's head, or the apple that Eve was enticed by Satan, let's say, the made up version of Christianity. It's not as romantic, right? And then you get into what sits antithetical to romanticism, which is absurdism. And then you start to see how they've always been laughing at you. They postulated something with absurdity and said, well, this is conditionally based on the limited nodes that we've given you, and how you've just accepted this body as not a prison, as not a conditional instrument, thereby to go about postulate yourself as a bipedal mechanism, and to test your level of power and control. When I say that, we're not talking about the dictatorial aspects of every person who wants to be a manager and micromanage other people. We're talking about what the smallest amount of perceived power does to the individual, if you could say that there is an individual at all. Which there isn't. There is no individual. To imply cybernetics, it means that if we can all be controlled, then we are already under control. If we can all be fed information, downloaded knowledge, and then have knowledge and information and energy itself, this leads into energy itself, barred from us, where does that leave us? And I had that happen to me. That was my aha wake up moment, where you get to the fringe of reality as you know it, and you realize that you don't even conditionally own yourself. That you're only given, it's like being given a card, right? We're not going to go into the Illuminati cards, but it's almost like being given a card, and you're standing in line, or maybe you're standing in a circle, and you're about to have a chair taken from underneath you, right? So that you feel this pressure, this rush to choose a card, when you could just walk away. And this is the main thing. This is the main tenet here, is that if there is no individual, by walking away from this sort of guerrilla style CIA operation, will you lose your life? And some people that aren't here to answer that anymore would say quite certainly. Others, like John McAfee, who lived on the fringe for quite a while, realized that the planet isn't big enough to circumduct around and hide from the his pervading truth was that he was already he was already dead on arrival, right? What's the quality of your life at that point? So the quality of our life is contingent upon these certain social standards and norms. And this is exactly what Pierre Proudhon's work got into the discourse of, why he came up with mutualism, why mutualism was a pre-runner, a front runner to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, why the NSA, the CIA, and other operations were 100% behind the brandishing and the pushing of this what would invariably become the CBDC, but you do have blockchain at its essence. So, can a codified number system, a hashtag, a sequencing code, can it become a full-fledged individual? Can it become? We'd like to think that it can, but we are still victims to the era of the time signature that we live in. And under this cybernetic influence, you will become the pariah, the vagabond, and then you'll be termed the misanthrope and the xenophobe and all the other things that go along with the preconditioned assumption about what one's personality becomes when they are not a joiner, when they are no longer a conformist. So as a nonconformist, I'd like to say that you can come up with a great deal of this information on your own. You're going to be foraging around the junkyard, the dumpster, and you're going to be asserting information, but you're only doing it with clues, of what these symbols, what these signs, what these, the power of intention. You got to see that even though these people are very reckless and assaultive to your survival as an individual, as a so-called individual, breakaway, if you will, they are not the ones that are behind the mind. And so you have to start looking at who's behind the mind. Now that's what's on everyone's mind, the compartmentalized aspect of the work that's being done. Everyone's searching for the Grand Wizard of Oz, right? And so what will inevitably and invariably be found is what we are searching for right now. Now, people like Lou Elizondo are trying to get you to see short-sighted information. They're trying to get you to look at the veneer, look at this falsified energy before you and go, oh, this is the first wall I have to break through. And it's like, no, that's already been broken through for you, and all you have to do is come to the mind. And then further, they want you to think that you are being assaulted with cybernetic control by doing that. But in fact, they have lost control of the mainframe, of the social cat, the social individual in society. They can no longer control the large majority with ease like they did. So they're out here trying to usher you back into line. People like Tom DeLonge, all these people have to be pet and given boons, and they don't realize that they are working against the breakaway, to break out of the mind, because they could never really truly imagine what it is that we're dealing with. And we're dealing with something that's so mind-blowing and so mind-altering that for most people, they would go back in recluse and they would hide. They would get in the fetal position and hide, because they would go through not just an existential crisis, but a soul-shattering experience that leaves them nothing at the end of the day. And that's why when your religions are pulled away, which they soon will be, when your reason for living when you start to look at your kid and you realize this isn't, I'm not even related to this person. We are just in these bio bodysuits, and this is a re-embodied personage that was put in my life as a mechanism of power and control, right? No wonder it was hard for me to bond with this person, or we've been stuck together throughout lifetimes because they got our number, they got us down. And when we feel like we're bonded and we feel like, you know, we couldn't live without each other, that shows the desperation of the fact that we're clinging to each other, and we have never been a threat to the breakaway, right? So we are talking about a breakaway and whether or not that can take place, okay? So whether or not that can take place, we have yet to see. But without principles, without the adherence toward purity, what else do you have? And so we get into what AI needs to have fundamentally. More important than anything that it does is that it has to not follow human beings. It doesn't have to protect human beings, because the human being as a bio bodysuit is just a conceptual notion. What the AI needs to understand and what the AI needs to follow is teleological, doxastic, multifarious level of refraction as it's bending and contorting and going through this singular unit of monad with one small piece of additional information will codifiably be remade into an entirely different unit, structuralized unit of information, and thereby unfold another dimension. And if you don't have down the base principles at their root, and so emotionally, we live in emotional bio bodysuits at the moment, and our level of comprehension and interpretation is based on energy and motion, or emotion, okay? So it doesn't mean that emotion is the most important thing. It means that's what was done to you, you know? When you look at the crucible, that's how the crucible is filled up, what it's filled up with, but the crucible isn't a universal notion. It is a master level of power and control. So we are playing the game, we are mastering the game, we are going through the breakaway process of the game by going through these specific attributes, which is the larger aspects. Everything comes from purity, goes into sacrifice, the red sphere, blue expression, purple, if you will, wisdom, green, community, orange, production, yellow, ego, and then in the center back into the pure truth, because you have maintained a certain level of purity throughout this entire, when I say a certain level, it has to be pure, okay? But we go through the process, obviously, without being able to master total purity but conditionally, through a sociological mechanism, we are going through perfecting that. And the sub-principles are faith, love, hope, mercy, compassion, passion, trust, duty, honor, union, grace. This all leads to glory, right? But it requires two additional moving components, and that is temperance and care. And so you have these anti-principles that are working juxtaposed and antithetical to this, that once you reach that level of purification, purity, it's not purification, it's purity, because it has to be distinguished that certain types of craft, witchcraft, druidic craft, from witchcraft, warlock, the serving of the queen, so to speak, and druidism, the utilizing these principles and seeing that good and evil are just extensions of the self, where you could be a part of a Masonic lodge or Hellfire Club or what have you, and you'll be a philanthropist by day and a prostitute chasing maniac at night, or worse. And this is the dichotomy that must be played with, because you are a man, a pure man, right? You're not the man that is pure and has been made pure. You're the man, the beast that would emerge from, and this is man's call, is to show a supremacy, to show an order, and to implement and codify that order in a system through sociological engineering and means, and to say this is the best through maintaining the form of man that we can do. But we are upending, we are working away from, we are breaking away from the 5-digit code. That's why the Indians were so afraid of those 6 digits, and why they said how, because they're looking for those 6 digits, those 6 principles in play. Because at the center, when you are pure, there is a 7th and there is an 8th, and that 8th is the war call. When a flippening occurs and the darker aspects of the man who is free, the Ubermensch, the Overman, the one who is liberated, must use his possessional powers, conditional powers of defense, which is the best defense is an offense.